Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Alina Vasquez, and I am with Human Services Research Institute. We are the organization that has been working in close collaboration with the department for a number of years in the development of the new budget model that will be implemented very shortly. Today's presentation reviews the basics of the new budget model, as well as a more detailed overview of some of the new employment services. This presentation is really targeted for current providers of supported employment, as well as providers who may be interested in providing any of the two new services in the realm of employment. Let's start with just a couple of training reminders for today. The first thing we want to really be clear about is we really want you to ask questions. For folks who may not have been a part of previous presentations about the new model, this can be quite a bit of new information. Do not feel overwhelmed or feel like you need to have a grasp of every aspect during the presentation today. There will be other opportunities to get additional information, including other trainings, including a new manual for providers and other kinds of stakeholders. And this training is being recorded, and the presentation slides will be made available on the My Choice Matters website for later reference. We will be pausing periodically throughout the training to answer questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and you also are more than welcome to raise your hand, and you can be taken off of mute when we pause for those question opportunities. I will note that because I'm sharing my full screen, I may not see your questions as they pop up automatically, but we will be pausing to take those questions. I also want to ask that folks please be sure to direct your questions to either all panelists or all attendees. If you direct your questions only to the host, there can be a little bit of a delay in getting those questions. And if you direct those questions to all attendees, then no one on the department side is able to see those questions. We will be keeping track of all the questions that are asked. And if there are any questions that are asked that we're not able to get to due to a limitation on time, or if we don't have the answer, we will be taking the opportunity to make sure those questions are answered in another venue. If you have any additional questions, either related to this training material or on other aspects of the new model, we ask that you go ahead and give those questions at hcbswaivers@dhw.idaho.gov, and you can get additional information as well as express any concerns or additional questions to that web address. Let's start by just doing a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to start with just a little broad background and then turn our attention to covering the new services. We'll discuss how you can enroll to become a provider of these new services, and then we will get into the basics of the new model. We'll start by detailing the new assessments and how they'll be used, describe the support level and the service mixes and how each of those are assigned, explain how a participant's budget is determined using something known as a model mix, ways that that budget can later be changed, known as something as a budget modification. We'll overview the new ISP form as well as new questionnaires and other documents that are going to be coming forward soon. Describe a new concept known as a mid-year plan change, as well as discussing addendums, and then provide a series of resources for you to be able to access at a later time. Let's start with a bit of background as to why we even are moving forward with a new budget model. As a lot of folks on the call are probably aware, there was a class action lawsuit filed in Idaho that is known as KWV Armstrong. The court held in that case that the existing budget tool, which is the tool that is still currently being used to set budgets, violated adults' due process rights because of its unreliability. The department and class counsel from the American Civil Liberties Union entered into a settlement agreement back in 2016. Under that settlement agreement, the department agreed to change the way it determines budgets for individuals in the adult DD program. This presentation today, as well as a number of other trainings we've done over the last few weeks and will continue doing throughout the month of June, are to explain those changes that are being made, as well as some other related changes the department is making simultaneously. And a group known as Community Now, which is still in active operation, was formed in consideration of the requirements under KW for additional stakeholder input. At its initial formation, Community Now met in a series of meetings to develop a series of recommendations to the department. There was quite a large host of recommendations, but in particular, a certain subset of those recommendations directly impacted some of the other changes that the department is making at the same time as implementing the new budget model. Those recommendations included a request for a more flexible service model to help support adults with IDD to meet their needs and explore their interests in the community. Another of those recommendations was to include pre-vocational career planning and individual support and employment services in the benefits package available through the department. The service changes that are happening simultaneously with the new budget model are a direct result of the recommendations that came from Community Now during that initial report and recommendation set. These changes include changes to the way that supported living works, so that high and intense, two forms of supported living that currently cover 24 hours a day of service are going away. And instead, individuals who utilize supported living will have the ability to obtain other services as well, including adult day health, developmental therapy, and community rehabilitation, which is another new service that is being added. Currently, individuals who use high or intense supported living are precluded from using these additional services. Individuals who want to continue getting supported living from the provider they currently receive supported living from and want to continue getting that on a 24-hour basis as they can today will still be able to do that under the new model. 3 new services are being added under traditional, specifically pre-vocational services, career planning, and community rehabilitation. Pre-vocational and career planning are 2 of the services we'll be talking more about here momentarily. A number of the sublimits for services were removed as a part of the new model, and the department is attempting to increase access to non-medical transportation by moving that service off of the waiver and onto the state plan so that more individuals will have access to utilize that service. Now let's turn our attention to talking in a little more detail about 2 of the new services that can specifically be provided by supported employment agencies. Pre-vocational services are intended to teach general employment skills in community settings to prepare someone for paid employment in the future. This service is intended to be time limited and is limited to a total of 520 hours over 2 plan years. Those plan years do not need to be subsequent, but there can be a break. So I could do some hours of pre-vocational in this year, 2022, but then not use that service again until 2025 if I so chose. This service is offered on both an individual and a group basis, although the group cannot exceed 4 participants, and the service cannot be duplicative of services provided by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. In order to provide the pre-vocational services under the waiver, an individual or a provider must be and meet all of the requirements for a supported employment agency. This service is really intended to teach those kinds of skills that make someone more ready to work in the community, not just teach the specific skills for a given job. This could include teaching someone skills around how to dress appropriately for work or how to interact with customers or coworkers, not the specific tasks related to getting a job at their local grocery store. Pre-vocational supports come from the discretionary supports component of the budget under the new model. We'll describe more about the different budget components a little later in this presentation. The second new service that specifically can be provided by supported employment agencies is career planning. Career planning is a service that is intended to develop a participant's career objective and plan, and to help them either attain or advance in competitive integrated employment. This service is for individuals who are really looking to identify where they want to go with their career long term. If they may already have a job, but it doesn't feel like a good fit or feel like they see a place for advancement, it may not align with their skills or interests. Career planning is intended to help folks identify exactly what their goals are around employment and how they can set out a plan for reaching those goals. It's supposed to assist with self-discovery and identification of that broader career direction. This service is time limited in that it can only be provided for up to 4 hours per week due to the nature of the service. It is offered on an individual basis only and also comes from the discretionary component of the budget. So how does one enroll to become a provider of career planning or pre-vocational services? If you are already a provider of supported employment and are a supported employment agency, you will not need to enroll in order to become a provider of this service. You can do so by contacting Livia Ivascu at the web address shown on, or at the email, shown on this slide, and using the subject New Service Options. You'll need to include your provider name, your PRZ provider number, address, phone number, and the regions you would like to serve. If you would like to get information about how to enroll as a supported employment agency but are not already a supported employment agency, you can get that information also by contacting Livia Ivascu, either at her email or the phone number identified on this slide, and she will help walk you through the process. We also wanted to provide a little bit of information about the non-medical transportation service, as we identify that non-medical transportation may be necessary for individuals who are hoping to receive or seeking pre-vocational or career planning supports. Non-medical transportation is intended to enable participants who are accessing DD state plan, waiver, or other community services and resources. It's to help that individual get where they need to go to obtain those supports or to participate in their community. This service can be provided by an agency or an individual, and when done so, will be paid at a rate of 56 cents per mile. Non-medical transportation, specifically for the purposes of supported employment, can be used outside of a participant's budget, so long as there is the necessary documentation provided. The rate being paid for this type of service is the same as for more general non-medical transportation. The main difference is that when non-medical transportation is being provided specifically to help someone get transportation related to that competitive integrated employment, it can be obtained outside of or in addition to the participant's budget. We'll talk more about a construct known as health, safety, or employment services and exactly how those can be obtained when we get into the new model momentarily. If you are interested in enrolling as a non-medical transportation provider to help support the array of services you provide to participants, you can do so by submitting a provider enrollment application for non-medical transportation through the Gainwell Technologies Provider Portal. If you need any assistance filling out that application, you can contact the Gainwell enrollment representative in your region. Before we turn our attention to talking about the new model in more detail, I want to pause and see if we have any questions on the new services that are being provided.
Hey, Alina, we have one question that came in where the individual asked, who will determine that the service is not duplicative of the IDVR services? And I think I can go ahead and answer that one if you'd like me to. So the department is working together with the Idaho Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. We are in the process of amending our memorandum of understanding with IDVR to clarify the circumstances in which individuals would seek pre-vocational and career planning services from Medicaid versus when they would seek those services from IDVR. And generally speaking, the intent is that individuals will be able to receive those pre-voc and the career planning services from Medicaid if they aren't quite ready to kind of enter that the voc rehab system, or if they've been identified as someone who can't benefit from or is not able to or eligible to receive services from vocational rehabilitation. And again, we're working on an MOU there, and we'll provide more details shortly around the exact criteria. But that process of determining whether or not something is duplicative will be between the department and IDVR, and we'll let you know what kind of documents we're looking for and that sort of thing as we move forward. And then, but if the services are approved on the individual's Medicaid plan, then you'll know that the services were determined not to be duplicative, and that it's okay to provide those services to the individual. The next question we received is, please define competitive employment, and will that be included in the regulations? I think their competitive employment really is, and Alina, I don't know if you can help me out with this a little bit, is generally, is there an application process where anyone who wants to apply for that job can apply? Is the person considered through that application process and hired as part of that general process together with anyone else in the community that is applying for that position? This isn't the level of detail that we will be including in regulation, but I think that's generally the definition.
Yeah, when we're talking about competitive integrated employment for the purposes of being able to obtain non-medical transportation as an employment service, or in order to receive supported employment as a service, what we're really trying to refer to is the ability for someone to be working in their community in an integrated setting. So not only working alongside other individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, but other members of their community, and are being paid at least minimum wage for that work. They are not receiving a lower wage than coworkers who are doing the same type of job, and are not being paid a sub-minimum wage as a part of the work they are doing, as sometimes occurs in things like sheltered workshops.
And those are all the written questions. I'm not seeing any hands raised. If you want to ask a question verbally to us, please just click that raise hand button on your WebEx screen, and we will take you off mute and let you ask your question. And I'm still not seeing any more raised hands, Alina, so I think we can move forward.
All right, very good. So we've just covered the section where we provide some detail about the two new services that are available to be provided by providers or supported employment agencies, and the process to enroll in those new services, and how to enroll as a non-medical transportation provider if you would like to offer that service to accompany the support you offer in supported employment, career planning, or pre-vocational services. We're now going to turn our attention to walking through the new budget model so that providers of services to folks in this program have an understanding of how that new model works, and how it differs from the current model. This presentation and the training today is organized by the key steps that exist for receiving adult DD services. This follows a regular pathway that all participants need to engage in every single year in order to keep getting services. All participants in the program need to start every year by getting an assessment. That assessment then results in the determination of a budget that they would get through a budget notice sent out from the department. Once an individual has their budget notice in hand, they would work with their plan developer and their ISP team to develop a plan for the kinds of supports and services they would like to receive over the course of the year. That plan is then approved by a care manager at the department, and then the individual can begin getting services in the upcoming plan year. A lot of individuals will receive those services throughout the year, and then when it comes time for their next recertification date, will go back and get their assessment in the following year. Some individuals, however, may need to make changes to the services they receive over the course of the year. That could be wanting to receive different services or wanting to change to a different type of provider. And if that is necessary, that can also be done within the course of the year. There is one additional step that exists for individuals who are applying for adult DD program services for the first time, and that is an application. As we roll into the new model, the application for services has changed slightly. However, any existing participants will not need to complete a new application in order to account for the new model. And that difference is really just around the description of the kinds of services that are available under the DD state plan. We're going to start our conversation today on the first key step that exists for all participants, that around the assessment. So currently, all individuals who receive the Adult DD program receive the SIB-R. That assessment is used for a series of purposes, including to help determine eligibility, both for the program and for the Adult DD waiver, as well as to help determine their budget. In the future, there will be two tools that are used for these same purposes. The Violin 3 is replacing the SIB-R for purposes of identifying both program eligibility and ICF ID level of care. ICF ID level of care is a requirement in order to receive adult DD waiver services. The Supports Intensity Scale Adult, or SIS-A, is replacing the SIB-R and the Inventory of Needs for the purposes of helping to determine an individual's annual budget. The new budget model requires the use of a valid and reliable assessment of support need. The SIS-A was selected as the new assessment of support need by a work group that included both department staff and external advocates. That work group reviewed a number of tools to see which tool would best meet all of the needs for the new model and would be the most amenable to the needs of participants. Through that process, the SIS-A was recommended, and that recommendation was accepted by the department, and the SIS-A was identified as the new tool to be utilized for purposes of establishing budgets. The new assessment tools are set to go live in the month of June. I will note that there is one slight correction to this slide, and that is, as the department has still not yet received approval from CMS, we no longer anticipate that the new assessment tools will begin on June 1st. The exact date for when the new assessment tools will come into effect is still to be determined, and the department will let all stakeholders know as soon as they have a firm date for when the new assessments will go live. It is still the department's intent to do so as soon as possible, and as soon as that approval from CMS is obtained, we will let folks know exactly when the new assessment tools are going to be used moving forward. Another thing to note about the transition to new assessments is the need to revise the assessment schedule. Typically, participants only receive a full assessment every 3 years. In the other 2 years, individuals receive something known as a focused review. That is simply a review to ensure that the information collected during the last full assessment is still accurate in describing the individual's needs. If that information is incorrect, they can then receive a full assessment, but if not, they only will receive that full assessment every 3 years. During the implementation of the new budget model, it will be necessary for all participants to receive a SIS-A and a Violin 3 in about 1 year. This will allow all participants to roll into the new model on their normal plan date over the course of that year. Because the process of doing a full assessment takes a lot longer for both individuals, respondents, and for the assessment provider, it will be necessary to get back onto a schedule where only 1/3 of participants receive a full assessment each year, and the other 2/3 receive that focused review. In order to do so, the department will be dividing all participants into 3 groups: Group A, Group B, and Group C. These groups will help determine when individuals will receive their second full SIS-A and Violin 3 under the new model. All participants, no matter which group they are assigned, will receive that full assessment during the implementation year. Participants who are assigned to Group A will then receive another full assessment of the Violin 3 and the SIS-A in the following year. They will then get 2 years of focused reviews before getting their third full assessment in 2026 to 2027. Participants who are assigned to Group B will also get that full assessment during implementation. They'll then get 1 focused review before getting their second full assessment in 2024 to 2025. They will then get 2 years of focused reviews before getting their third full assessment in 2027 to 2028. Participants who are assigned to Group C will follow what is more typical a schedule. They'll need to get that full assessment during the implementation year in order to move into the new model. They'll then receive 2 years of focused reviews and will get their second full assessment in 25 to 2026. Once this schedule has been completed, Individuals will then return to receiving a full assessment approximately every 3 years. Individuals will be assigned to these 3 groups at random and will be informed of their group assignments at around the time that they complete their first CIS-A and Violin 3. The one exception to that is that individuals who volunteer to participate in the practice CIS-As necessary to allow the Liberty assessors to finalize their training on the CIS-A will be automatically placed into Group C. This is to say thank you for the fact that they just completed a CIS-A for the practice and will need to do another in 2022 to 2023 as a part of implementation. So we'll then have 2 years until they'll need to do the next full assessment. Any participants who have a change in condition at any point during this roll-in schedule will go ahead and receive that full assessment as soon as it is identified that it is needed. We will talk about the change in condition process towards the end of this presentation. Any new participants who enroll in the program will receive a full assessment on that regular 3-year cycle, dependent on their application and entry date. I'm going to pause quickly to see if we had any questions come in before we talk a little bit more about the Violin 3 and the CIS-A.
We have not had any more written questions come in. I am checking on the hands raised. And I am not seeing, double check. And I am not seeing any hands raised right now. Oh, actually, one more written question came in. Actually, that is a feedback or comment that went to everyone. I don't think that's a question that we need to address right now, Alina.
Okay. Then why don't we turn our attention to talking a little bit more about the new assessments, and we'll start with the Violin 3. The Violin 3 is an assessment that allows the assessor and respondents to review and discuss the adaptive behaviors that an individual has in the following areas. That is communication, daily living skills, socialization, motor skills, and maladaptive behaviors. In addition to these overarching domains, there's also a series of subdomains in each of these areas, including things like under communication, around receptive, expressive, and written skills. I'm not going to read through all of the subdomains as they are listed here on this slide. In order to establish eligibility for the adult ED program, someone must meet 3 criteria. The first is that they must be an adult, meaning they're 18 years or older. The second is they must have a qualifying diagnosis that was made before the age of 22 and have submitted documentation with their application for services identifying that diagnosis. Applicable diagnoses include intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, as well as other closely related conditions. The third requirement is that the individual must have a substantial limitation in at least 3 of 7 major life activities. These include self-care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, self-direction, capacity for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. The Violin 3 is the tool that is utilized to help the department identify whether or not an applicant for the program has a substantial limitation in at least 3 of these areas. All individuals who meet DD program eligibility are then able to receive the state plan HCBS services. So how exactly is the Violin 3 utilized to help identify that someone has a substantial limitation in at least 3 major life activities? This slide shows you both the major life activities as well as the specific criteria from the Violin 3 that is utilized to identify a substantial limitation. As you can see, some areas use a score from just one subdomain. For example, under self-care, a V-scale score of less than or equal to 10 from the personal subdomain would indicate a substantial limitation in the area of self-care. Other areas use an entire domain. For example, in order to identify a major or a substantial limitation in the area of receptive and expressive language, you would need a standard score of less than or equal to 75 in the entire communication domain. In the area of learning, a standard score of less than or equal to 75 on the adaptive behavior composite is utilized to determine a substantial limitation. The adaptive behavior composite is a combination of the communication, daily living, and socialization subdomains. An individual could also meet a substantial limitation in the learning area by having an IQ of less than or equal to 75. Other areas, such as self-direction and capacity for independent living, use two separate criteria in combination to identify a substantial limitation. For self-direction, an individual must have a V-scale score of less than or equal to 10 in both the community subdomain and the coping skills subdomain. Similarly, in order to establish a substantial limitation in their capacity for independent living, an individual must have a score of less than or equal to 10 in the domestic subdomain and the play and leisure subdomain. Again, an individual needs to have a substantial limitation in 3 of these 7 areas in order to meet the criteria for the DD program.
Alina,
Yes, please go ahead.
we got a couple of questions I just wanted to address. On, I believe, 2 slides back, I think, when we were talking about the requirements for DD eligibility and that the individual would have, that their developmental disability would be attributable to an impairment such as an intellectual disability. An individual asked if there was a cutoff on the IQ score, and that IQ score is listed in IDAPA 160310 500A. So that first subpoint for intellectual disability on the left-hand column there, the IQ score for that is up to 75 to determine the presence of that intellectual disability. Also, we got one quick question about that we indicated that assessments would not start as of June 1st, but the question was whether or not the new service array would be available as of June 1st. The new service array also will not start on June 1st. We are looking for CMS, we need CMS approval also to initiate the new services. So as we talk about that implementation start date and when those assessments will start, the new services will start, a delay for the assessments would also mean a delay for those new services while we wait for CMS approval.
Yep. And just a point of clarification, Karen, for folks attending this training, not all individuals require an intellectual disability in order to be enrolled in the program. That is just one of the possible qualifying diagnoses. And an IQ of less than or equal to 75 is the indicator for intellectual disability. That is not necessarily a requirement for one of the other qualifying diagnoses, correct?
Correct, thank you. And while we're paused, I don't see any hands up, so I think we can move ahead.
Okay, very good. So now that we've talked about the way that we establish program eligibility, again, being 18 years or older, having a qualifying diagnosis, and having a substantial limitation in at least 3 major life activities, we now can turn our attention to how someone establishes their ICF ID level of care criteria. An adult who applies for the waivers, who applied for waiver services and meets ICF ID level of care are then eligible to receive waiver services. Those services can be provided via traditional or self-direction, and it is the waiver that includes services such as career planning, pre-vocational services, and supported employment. In order to meet ICF ID level of care, and therefore be eligible to receive waiver services, an individual must meet all of the DD program eligibility requirements we just described. They must also require active treatment and meet one or more of the criteria detailed below. That includes having a functional need, a behavioral need, a combined functional behavioral need, or a medical need, which would qualify them to receive services within an intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. The functional criteria, as well as the behavioral criteria, in order to meet the ICF-ID level of care, are established using the Violin 3. In order to meet the functional criteria, an individual must have an adaptive behavior composite less than 55. In order to meet the behavioral criteria, an individual must have a maladaptive internal or external score of greater than or equal to 21, or could have a maladaptive internal or external score greater than 21 if they also engage in aggressive or self-injurious behaviors. Individuals can also gain entry based on a combination of their functional and behavioral needs, or on the basis of medical need, so long as they can show that based on their medical condition, they have a significantly affected functional level and capabilities, and therefore would require a level of service that could be provided in an ICF-ID. Next, we'll turn our attention to the assessment that's utilized to help establish budgets. That is the Supports Intensity Scale Adult, or SIS-A. Let's start by identifying who exactly attends the SIS-A interview. The individual seeking services, or the adult with the intellectual or developmental disability, are always invited and encouraged to take part in the SIS-A interview. However, an individual is not required to do so if they do not wish to. What is required is that at least two people who know the adult well and understand his or her support needs be present for the entire interview. It is the adult's choice who takes part in the SIS-A interview, and there can be more than two respondents, including the individual themselves, but there is a requirement for at least two respondents who are not the person seeking services. The SIS-A is divided into three overarching areas. Section 1 is around exceptional medical and behavioral support needs. Section 2 is called the Support Needs Index and talks about the kinds of support needs individuals may need for their general needs. And Section 3 is called the Protection and Advocacy Scale. Supplemental questions are also asked during the SIS-A interview to obtain additional detail regarding the amount of support in hours that a participant may need for their extraordinary medical or behavioral support needs. An individual is assigned a level based on their general support needs using Section 2, specifically the subsection 2A, home living, 2B, community living, and 2E, health and safety. Individuals can be assigned to particular levels for their medical needs or behavioral needs based on a process known as verification. In addition to that verification process, which we'll talk about in a moment, the SIS-A is utilized to help identify or flag individuals who may be more likely to meet that criteria based on their responses to the assessment. Information from Section 1 and the supplemental questions are utilized to flag individuals who may meet the criteria for levels M or B. This slide shows the specific criteria to be assigned to levels 1, 2, and 3. Again, levels 1, 2, and 3 are based on someone's general support need and go from low to high. Individuals are assigned to level 1 based on having a SIS-A section 2A, 2B, and 2E standard score of between 8 and 22, are assigned to level 2 if they have a standard score on those three sections between 23 and 30, or are assigned to level 3 if they have a standard score in those three sections of 31 to 52. As I already noted, individuals are assigned to level M or level B based on having an extraordinary medical or extraordinary behavioral support need that has been verified by the verification review team, and individuals are only assigned to one support level. What that means is that there is the potential that someone could meet the criteria for two levels. If Karen had a score on section 2A, 2B, and 2E of 28 and had a verified medical need that met the requirements for level M, she would both meet the requirements for level 2 and for level M. However, she would only be assigned to one level, and that would be the level of greatest support need. Therefore, Karen would be assigned to level M as she met the verified need criteria. Individuals who meet the criteria for both level M and level B, meaning that they are verified to have a significant medical risk and a significant behavioral risk, will be assigned to the level that is identified as being the primary driver of their extraordinary support team by the verification review team. Now let's talk a little bit more about how folks are assigned to levels M or B. All participants are eligible to request consideration for these extraordinary medical and extraordinary behavioral support levels. That process is called verification review and is very similar to the current intense review process that is utilized for participants who utilize the supported living service. Participants will be asked during the assessment if they believe they meet the criteria for level M or B and whether they would like to pursue verification review. If the participant is not present during the assessment, respondents will be asked this question on their behalf. This slide also provides the criteria to be assigned to level M as outlined in the forthcoming IDAPA rules. Again, this is not an IDAPA citation that is current, as these rules will be published very shortly, but the criteria for this is as follows. The individual must have a chronic or acute medical condition, which is complex, unstable, or both. They must require one-to-one staffing to provide frequent intervention and constant monitoring for all or substantial portions of the day. And without this intervention and monitoring, the individual will require placement in a nursing facility, hospital, or ICFID. Any individual who requests verification and meets these three criteria will be assigned to level M by the verification review team. This slide provides the criteria for level B. While it seemingly looks more complicated, one general construct is true for any individual who obtains entry into level B. That is, they must require one-to-one staffing to provide frequent intervention and constant monitoring for 16 hours a day to prevent the behavior in question. This criteria can be utilized in combination with having a pending felony charge related to the serious injury or harm of another person, being on probation for a recent felony conviction related to the serious injury or harm of another person, being on parole for incarceration from a felony conviction related to the serious injury or harm of another person, being released for time served from incarceration for a felony conviction related to the serious injury or harm of another person, having a history of predatory sexual activity, whether or not they have been involved in the criminal justice system, so long as the activity is of a nature as it could result in a misdemeanor or felony charges, and so long as that individual is at a high risk to reoffend based on a sexual offender risk assessment that has been completed within the last 3 years by an appropriate professional. The final criteria is someone could be assigned to level B if they have a documented sustained history of serious aggressive behavior causing harm to themselves or others, and that serious aggressive behavior is such that the threat or use of force on another person makes that person reasonably fear bodily harm, and the participant has the capacity to carry out such a threat. Again, no matter the specific scenario, all individuals assigned to level B must require that one-to-one staffing to provide frequent intervention and constant monitoring for 16 hours or more per day related to the behavior in question. Next, let's talk a little bit more about the process of flagging for verification. Again, all that flagging for verification means is that the responses that a participant provided or that respondents provided on Section 1 of the SIS-A and the supplemental question indicates that that individual may be at a higher likelihood to meet the criteria for level M or level B. An individual would flag for level M if they had a response of one or more to at least one item in Section 1A of the SIS-A, responded yes to the medical supplemental question, and identified that they needed at least 84 support hours per week for an extraordinary medical support need. Individuals would flag for level B if they had a response of one or more to at least one item in Section 1B of the SIS-A, had a response of yes to the behavioral supplemental question, and indicated that they needed at least 84 hours per week of support for an extraordinary behavioral need. Individuals can also flag on a combination of M and B, and that is when someone responded of a one of at least a 1 to at least one item in both sections 1A and 1B, responded yes to both supplemental questions, and in combination of their responses to the medical and behavioral support questions of the supplemental questions, indicated a need for 84 hours of combined support. Individuals who flag for verification are not required to go through that process. It is simply an opportunity to identify folks who are more likely to perhaps need that level of support and meet the criteria for these levels. All individuals who request verification are provided the verification questionnaire and will be asked to submit that questionnaire along with any supporting documentation within 14 days of the assessment. Individuals can also request verification at any point during the plan year, but it is highly recommended that they make that request at the time of their assessment. Any individuals who do not request verification will be assigned to levels 1, 2, or 3 based on their SIS-A scores in the manner outlined previously. This questionnaire is a new aspect of the new model, and individuals who want to complete this questionnaire only need to complete the section relevant to the type of extraordinary medical or behavioral support that they are seeking verification for. This questionnaire also provides information about the kinds of supporting documentation that is recommended to be submitted to show that a person has that type of need. This slide also shows some examples of the type of documentation one might want to provide when seeking level M or seeking level B. The verification review team is the body who is responsible for identifying whether or not someone meets the criteria for level M or level B. This group includes a clinically licensed behavioral health professional, a representative from BDDS Quality Assurance, a representative care manager from BDDS, a licensed practical or registered nurse, a representative from the FACTS Crisis Prevention Team, a qualified intellectual disabilities professional, and an administrative member. If the verification review team determines that a person meets any of the criteria for level M or B using the verification questionnaire, the submitted supporting documentation, and the records maintained by the department, that individual will be assigned to that level. The participant's eligibility and budget notice will include information on the team's decision, their rationale, and the specific documents they reviewed to make their decision. Participants always have the right to appeal decisions by the verification review team. I'm going to pause here and ask if there are any questions on the process for getting assigned to your level.
So we do not have any questions right now about the assignment to levels. We have received a couple of questions, Alina, regarding how individuals at certain levels may be able to use their budgets and the limitations on services or combinations of services. But I think that's something we're going to get to a little further in the presentation. So if we haven't answered those questions in the presentation later on, I will raise those questions at that time.
Very good. All right, then let's turn our attention to describing.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
we got one more question that came in that asked, will the membership of the verification review team rotate, or will they all be permanent members? If rotating, how frequent is the rotation? And if permanent, how is it determined for them to be a part of the VRT? And I think I can answer that, and we'll let you kind of fill in if I'm missing any gaps, Alina. But the verification review team, that's part of why we've identified the members of the team based on their position within the department, because as we know, people come in and out of the department or they change positions. And so individuals will be assigned to the verification review team if they are one of these individuals or hold one of the positions identified above. So they won't necessarily be permanent, but they also won't be on a rotating basis where we will look for a new quality assurance representative or a new BDS care manager from time to time. We'll just make sure that those individuals on the team represent all of these positions. Would you add anything to that, Alina?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Um, okay, I don't see any more written questions. Let me just double check on hands raised. Again, remember, if you'd like to ask a question out loud, you're more than welcome to raise your hand and ask that question. We'll unmute you to allow you to ask that question. I have to run through the list because the hand shows up in a dark black on a gray background. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm seeing it. Nope, I don't see any hands raised. So I think we are good to move on.
All right. So we've just walked through the process that someone gets assigned to their level 1, 2, 3, M or B. The next step in the process is for someone to be assigned or to select their service mix. A service mix is simply the term that we utilize to group participants based on the way they choose to receive their supports and the type of residential supports they want to receive. In total, there are 7 different service mixes available within the Adult DD program. Participants can change their service mix at any time, with one exception, and that is individuals who receive the state plan HCBS only service mix can only change that service mix by receiving eligibility for the adult DD waiver. That is the only service mix available for individuals who are only receiving state plan services from the department and from the program. And as a result, in order to move to a different service mix, you would need to show that you have met the ICF ID level of care requirement and are eligible to receive the DD waiver. Participants in any of the traditional service mixes can access the full array of employment-related services. Individuals who are assigned to the state plan HCBS only service mix are not able to access the employment-related services, as none of the 3 services we've identified, pre-vocational, career planning, or supported employment, are available through the 1959 Adult DD State Plan. Service mixes, there are 3 that are applicable for folks using traditional services: certified family home, community-only supports, and supported living services, and 3 that are applicable for individuals who choose to self-direct their services. That is, live-in supports for individuals who receive in-home habilitation from a CSW that they live with, community-only supports for individuals who choose to receive no in-home habilitation, and outside supports for individuals who receive their in-home habilitation from a CSW that they do not live with. Individuals on traditional get a service mix based on the type of residential supports they want to receive. That could be certified family home, supported living, or community only for those individuals who choose to receive no in-home habilitation. I'm going to pause again for any other questions that have come up, and then allow us to take a quick break before we dig into how we get to budgets.
Let's see, we've received one question about volunteer positions, I think related to supported employment that I think we may be able to address further down in the presentation. We also received a question that asked, will decisions by the verification review team be by the majority, or will the full agreement by all members be required? And the response to that is the verification review team will come to consensus on the level that an individual should be assigned.
I'll just add for further clarification that not all members of the full VRT team need to be in attendance in order to have a meeting of the VRT team. So, for example, and I'll just move back to the slide momentarily, while there are individuals on the verification review team who meet each of these roles, it is not necessarily a requirement that there be 8 individual members present at every meeting. So, for example, if a verification was being done for somebody on a question around behavioral support needs, it may not be necessary or required that the nurse be in attendance at that verification review team. There are specific rules around the number of members who need to be involved, et cetera, with regard to how the verification review team operates.
Great, thank you, Alina. And Check here again. I don't think we don't have any hands raised, and I think the other questions that have been asked will be better addressed further down in our presentation.
All right, well, with that, why don't we take a quick break? Why don't we reconvene back here at 3 minutes past the hour? So that would either be 2:03 or 3:03, depending on your time zone. And then we will start talking about how someone's support level and service mix are utilized to help get them into their budget. All right, we're going to keep going right along. We've still got more than half the presentation to get through, so let's get started. So we've started by identifying exactly how the assessments are utilized to establish someone's eligibility, both for the program and for the waiver. Also, how the assessments are utilized to help someone get into their support level, 1, 2, or 3. We've also described the way that folks can be assigned to levels M or B through verification, and how someone selects their service mix. It is a combination of someone's support level and service mix which determines their budget. Each support level and service mix combination have their very own model mix. The next couple slides will show you both what a model mix is and the model mixes that are particularly at issue as we move into the new model. In addition to the supports that someone can get using their budget, they also can get services beyond that assigned budget using one of 3 different types of budget modifications. This is a health or a safety service request, a health or safety budget modification request, or an employment-related service request. We will talk about those following our review of the model mixes. So model mixes were developed by identifying the average type and amount of service that the department anticipates individuals will use within each support level and service mix combination. Model mixes are then priced out to determine the exact budget the department will afford for participants to purchase their services. That is done by identifying the average amount of annual units that the department anticipates someone will use of a given service, and then the applicable rate for that service. All of the services that the department believes will be utilized by individuals at a given support level and service mix are included in the mix. Then the dollar value for each of the services that is going to be added to the mix is then calculated. Those are added together to get to the total budget. Participants are not required to use the specific services that are included in the model mix for their support level and service mix. They instead can use the dollars flexibly within the different budget components to purchase those services and supports they would like to receive. Model mixes can also be altered as needed by the department when inputs change. For example, the rates for some services recently changed following the decision by the legislature to approve increased rates, and as a result, the model mixes were adjusted to reflect those newly approved rates. We're going to start by identifying the different budget components that walk into the support budget under the new model. The 3 components are residential supports, discretionary supports, and planning supports. Again, there is still the ability to get some additional supports and services outside of the budget through those types of budget modifications we just described. This slide shows you of the entire service array available to participants who receive waiver services using the traditional model, which services fall into which component of the budget. Residential supports comprise of certified family supports and supported living supports. Planning supports include both service coordination and plan development. Discretionary supports include all of the kinds of supports that someone may use during the day, including employment supports such as pre-vocational services and career planning. Supported employment is included as a health, safety, and employment service. These are services that can be included outside of the budget by simply meeting the service-specific criteria for that service. Also in this group are services such as skilled nursing, specialized medical equipment or supplies, home-delivered meals, etc. The next few slides will walk you through model mixes for a variety of different service mixes. I will note that these slides are a little bit hard to read because of the size of the model mixes, so we'll quickly orient you to the table and then provide an example for one support level. All of the model mixes are also available on the My Choice Matters website, so you can feel free to go to that site in order to pull that information down and look at it on your own computer where you can zoom in more effectively. This is the model mix for traditional certified family home. As you can see across the top, the model mix includes each of the 5 support levels, support level 1, 2, 3, M, and B. It's then divided by the different budget components: residential budget, discretionary budget, planning budget, and then the total budget. The second column provides the different services that are within each of the different components. Discretionary, for example, provides a whole host of services that were just described in the previous slide. Planning includes the plan development and service coordination, as those are the 2 services that come out of that portion of the budget. The next column provides the applicable reimbursement rate for each service. We're now going to move to the next slide so you can look at this in a little more detail. So this is an excerpt from the same model mix, but specifically for the discretionary services for individuals at level 1. As you can see, each of the services is listed, as is the rate for that service. It's provided at the 15-minute rate, as that is the listed rate, but that is also then calculated on the hour basis. Then the department went through the process of identifying how many hours per week they wanted to include on average within the model mix. This was done out of a 50-week year for discretionary supports, because discretionary supports are of a nature where individuals may take breaks from these services throughout the year for illness, vacation, holidays, etc. So for adult day health, for example, 4 hours per week were included out of a 50-week year. That equals 200 hours over the course of a year. At a rate of $11.16 per hour, that would equal $2,232 being added to the budget for the purposes of adult day health. Again, individuals are not required to purchase that service at all or in the amount indicated in the model mix. That is simply the calculation we use to get to the budget. The same process is done for every service within the discretionary budget, multiplying the weeks per year by the hours per week by the applicable rate. Then the amount for each service is added together to get to the total budget of $27,955.40 for discretionary supports. As you may see here, for level 1, there are no hours included for pre-vocational, either individual or group. However, that does not indicate a preclusion from utilizing that service from somebody in the Certified Family Home Service Mix at level 1. It simply was not factored into how the budget was arrived at. These budget dollars within discretionary are available for an individual to purchase any of the discretionary services that they would like in the amount that makes sense to help meet their goals, so long as they are aligning with the overall requirements for that service. So for example, you could not use your entire budget of just under $28,000 just for career planning, because there is a limit of only 4 hours per week for career planning. Therefore, if you were to use the entire budget for that service, that would equate to more than 4 hours per week, which is precluded by the service itself. Similarly, individuals can only receive pre-vocational supports for up to 520 hours over 2 different plan years. That means that that is a limitation as to how much of that service is available. However, so long as the service makes sense for the individual and there is a provider to provide that service, they can utilize any of the available services within the budget, whether or not that service was factored in to the model mix itself. This slide then brings together all of the different budget components. The residential budget component, which for this individual at level 1, certified family home is paid at $53.39 per day, 365 days a year, so just around $19,500 are added to the budget. Adding that to the discretionary section of the budget we just described, and adding that to the planning supports, which is the same amount across all levels and all service mixes on traditional, as it includes 12 hours per year of plan development and 54 hours per year of service coordination. We then add these 3 figures together to get to the total budget. For someone receiving the certified family home mix at level 1, that budget is $50,634.51. The next slide shows you just a quick overview of the HCBS state plan only service mix. What you may note in this service mix is that the variety of discretionary services is reduced because individuals in this service mix are only able to utilize those services that are on the 1915I state plan. Therefore, this service mix does not include career planning or pre-vocational services, as individuals in this service mix cannot utilize either of those services as they are specific to the waiver. The next service mix is for traditional community only. Again, same basic construction, moving from support level 1 up through support level B, divided by the different budget components. And then finally, the model mix for traditional supported employment. Traditional supported living. Again, you'll see the same basic construction. One key difference for this model mix is that the dollars associated with the residential section of the budget do vary by support level, which is different than how it is constructed in certified family home, is that is a flat per diem of $53.39 for all providers of the service. I know we walked through these pretty quickly, mainly because they're a little bit hard to see. I really recommend that if you'd like to get more information about the model mixes, that you go to the My Choice Matters website to look at these in more detail. In addition to the services people can utilize using their budget, you also can access those health, safety, or employment services outside of the budget. This side provides the entire list of health, safety, and employment services available on traditional, noting that supported employment, which is a key service provided by those supported employment agencies, is included on this list. That means that any individual who has a supported employment plan, submits that plan, and includes the supported employment service on their budget, so long as they meet the service-specific requirements, can add that service to their plan without deducting those dollars from their overall budget. All budget notices, once we move into the new model, will include an attachment that provides a list of all of the health, safety, and employment services, as well as the service-specific criteria to use those services. Individuals also will have the ability to request a budget modification to increase the dollars available within their residential component of their budget or the discretionary component of their budget due to a health risk or a safety risk. This slide provides the documentation that may be utilized to establish a health risk or a safety risk, and all of the budget notices will include the form necessary to complete in order to request a budget modification due to a health risk or a safety risk with their plan. One other quick factor to note about the implementation of the new budgets is that there is an impact of the public health emergency and the American Rescue Plan in how we'll be rolling into the new model. Because of COVID-19, we are still in a federal public health emergency. The federal government chose to provide states with extra money to help provide supports and services because of the public health emergency. This was through the American Rescue Plan. CMS, or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, put in place special rules because of the public health emergency. They also put in place some special rules stating what states must do in order to keep the money they provided under the American Rescue Plan. All of these rules impact the way we'll start using the new budget model. The ARP rules essentially say that the state cannot make it harder to be found eligible for services than it was on April 1st, 2021, that people must be able to keep getting the amount and type of service they could get on April 1st, 2021, and that provider rates cannot go lower than they were on April 1st, 2021. The department is still working with CMS to identify exactly how this is going to impact the implementation of the new budget model and exactly for how long. For now, the department thinks it will impact in 3 ways. The first is that everyone who is currently eligible for the DD program will stay eligible. The second is that any new applicants who are found ineligible using the Violin 3 will have the chance to be assessed using the SIB-R. And third, participants will have access to their current budget until all ARP requirements are met, which is currently projected to be in March of 2024. This means that the new budget notices, which will go out once we begin implementation, will include both the budget as established under the new model, which we'll be calling the advisory budget, and the highest budget that an individual had from April 1st, 2021 through the implementation of the new model, That we'll be referring to as your ARP budget. For almost all participants, the ARP budget will be equivalent or equal to their current KW budget, as the KW budget is the highest budget that folks have been assigned since 2016. New budget notices will provide information around someone's advisory budget, providing the total amount and then the amount by each of the subcategories. The budget notice will also inform you of your ARP budget, letting you know that it's simply the highest budget you were assigned between April 1st, 2021 and the date of implementation of the new model. Individuals assigned budgets will be the higher of those two amounts. So if your ARP budget is higher than your advisory budget, then your ARP budget amount will be included on this line. If someone's advisory budget is higher than their ARP budget, then it is their advisory budget that will be inserted on this line. With that, we have concluded the section about how folks get to their budgets, describing both how we get to the actual budget itself using the model mixes, the different types of budget modifications, including the health, safety, and employment services, and budget modifications due to health or risk or safety risk, and how folks will be impacted by still having access to their current budgets or ARP budgets as we roll out initially. I'm going to pause and ask for any questions before we start talking about how plans are developed.
Okay, I think we have a few questions we can kind of pause and respond to now. The first question is, can participants on level M or B receive pre-vocational career planning and community employment supported employment services?
Yes, individuals who are assigned to those levels can receive any of those services, but for individuals who are in the state plan only service mix, because those services are all waiver services.
And kind of following up on that a little bit, are there any restrictions or limitations to anyone on levels 1, 2, 3, or M or B in relation to any vocational services? And if so, what are they?
The limitations for vocational services are as previously identified, so a max of 4 hours per week of career planning, a max of 520 hours over the lifetime of the participant for pre-vocational, which can be utilized in up to 2 different plan years, and then the limitation of the amount of funding available within a participant's budget to then procure the services that they would like to receive. Again, supported employment services can be provided outside of the budget, so long as they meet the service-specific requirements.
And then are there any combinations of new services that are disallowed? And I think the question there has to do with currently we only allow like a combination of supported employment and adult day health. Um, and developmental therapy could be up to 30 or 40 hours per week or something like that. And so what we've done in this new model is we've pulled back those limitations on combinations of services so that individuals really can choose the services that work best for them within the budget amounts that they are provided or within those health or safety additions to the budget. Um, see, was the non-medical transportation rate based on transporting an individual or a group of individuals, and how is the rate determined? The non-medical transportation was a rate, oh, you know what? I'm going to find exactly how we got to that 56 cents per minute or per mile. But it is I believe, an individual rate just per person. I think a lot of times with the non-medical transportation, we would see individuals wanting to go to those community activities that interest them. And so we wanted to make sure that the rate was sufficient to transport individuals if they did want to do something on their own.
Yep. And the 56 cents per mile was in alignment with the federal rate at the time that the request was made to the legislature for the funding to include that rate. So we understand that the amount per mile has since adjusted on the federal level, but it remains the 56 cents a mile. That is what was approved by the legislature and what was the applicable federal rate at the time that the request was put in.
And I think we're getting a follow-up question that says, what about employment for 24-hour supported living services? Are there limitations there?
There are not limitations to how much supported employment someone can receive, so long as they have a competitive job in the community and need support in order to do that job. There are some limitations about the ability to bill a 24-hour per diem for someone's supported living while also receiving certain amounts of other kinds of services. But that is not a preclusion on the amount of supported living someone can provide or the amount of supported employment someone can provide, but simply an adjustment to how those services would need to be billed. So, for example, if Karen were in level M and we're going to receive 8 hours in a given day of supported employment, and receive supported living supports, her supported living provider would be disallowed from billing a 24-hour per diem on the day where she was receiving 8 hours of supported employment. But that does not preclude her from reusing supported living and supported employment as two services on the same given day.
And I also see a question, and Hannah, I see you've got kind of your question in two parts. If I misstate this, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you and let you ask your question. But I believe there's a question as whether or not the CSE or the pre-vocational providers will be able to receive non-medical mileage as well. And I think if the individual needs non-medical transportation to get to their location for their employment, the individual could request a health or safety or employment modification to add non-medical transportation mileage to their budget. Any provider who is enrolled as a non-medical transportation provider would be able to bill for those non-medical transportation miles.
You simply cannot bill for two services simultaneously. So if I am a supported employment provider, and I'm going to provide Karen with supported employment, and I also need to help Karen get to the location of her supported employment, I could go to Karen's home, pick her up, drive her the 10 miles to her place of employment, and bill the non-medical transportation for those 10 miles. I would then begin providing her supported employment service once we arrive at her place of employment, provide that supported employment for the duration of her work shift if that's what she needed, and then could put back on my non-medical transportation hat to drive her from the location of her workplace back to her home, again that 10 miles, but I will have already ended my supported employment during that point in time. So over the course of that day, I'm providing Karen with two different services, just not simultaneously.
Great, thank you, Alina. Let's see here.
Hannah's raised her hand,
Oh, thank
so
you.
I'll unmute her.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. So that all sounds okay, except I'm providing supported living on a 24-hour basis, and the person has a job in the community for 2 hours a day, and I have to stay and staff the other two people that they share a home with. So it is now on the supportive employment provider to provide that transportation, pick them up at home and take them to work. Now I haven't exceeded my 4 hours of away from the home. So do I get to bill per diem? And does that supportive employment person now gets to pay their staff from the time that they pick that individual up, but only gets to bill supportive employment while at the work site? So there's some we've got some gaps in there that we we need to understand how we're supposed to document and how we can bill for that scenario, because I would say that's the most realistic. Many folks that have community supportive employment are gonna work just a few hours a day. We would love for them to work 8 hours, but that's pretty rare. And so can you kind of walk through what that would look like?
So the scenario of how an individual in that scenario would get to their place of employment, obviously could vary. So it could be that perhaps you are providing supports to three individuals, right? Three individuals in that home. And you guys all go and are on your way to do the grocery shopping for the other individuals. You would drop that person off at their supported employment site. The supported employment provider would begin providing that service at the point that you delivered them. You would continue on to do the other kinds of residential habilitation services that you're doing with the other two individuals, and then perhaps pick them up on your way back home. Or, as you indicated, and as I indicated in my example, that supported employment provider could become authorized to be a non-medical transportation provider and then would be able to bill that per mile rate. You're right, they could not provide two services simultaneously. It would have to be one or the other. But it would be really a process of planning with the individual and with the providers to figure out the best coordination of how to get them to where they needed to go in order to engage in that employment and then also to support the other folks that they were sharing their home with.
Okay, so just to clarify, somebody's employed for 2 hours a day. They need to be then billed at the 96 units a day. Well, it would be 88 units. And then the time of transport really isn't getting paid unless the supportive employment provider is providing it, correct?
If the supported living provider is providing the transportation to the place of employment as a part of the supported living service, then that would be being covered within the per diem. If the supported employment provider was providing that service as non-medical transportation only, then that's how it'd be being provided, was through the mileage rate. And I'm sure there's a third scenario, but I've forgotten it. I apologize, Hannah.
Or the supported employment provider could just start providing supported employment at the time of pickup,
Yes, thank you,
not
Karen.
charge non-medical transportation. Just charge the whole time to supported employment.
So okay, so now you really went down a wormhole now. So now if the supportive employment is getting to bill during that time of pickup and transport, then we're going to have a formal goal addressing that so that we are showing that documentation, or how, because this is something that has been brought up a lot, especially in the last 3-4 years, is that under Medicaid with audits for community supportive employment, we are not to bill outside the work hour. So we're going to need some real clear instruction on how that works. If that's the case, we would gladly provide that, and it would cover certainly more than being a non-medical
So
transportation
why
provider.
don't we take that back and have some more conversation about it? Obviously, I think that this also sort of falls into an arena that I know is of concern for supported living providers around sort of how to manage and mitigate that need for or potential for other services simultaneously. So I think the conversation will also come up in that venue. But I think that probably some additional work is needed just to clarify that from the department's perspective. But understanding that that's an area of concern is helpful for us, and we can take that back.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot of nuances that I just don't think we're gonna get to today, but these are things I think you need to take back. Maureen asked, can we just bill as supportive employment? And I think that would be the cleanest way, but we need to make sure that there's clear communication to those providers, knowing that
Yep.
they can and how to do so.
We will clarify if it is feasible to bill supported employment for the time that someone is transporting someone from their home to the job site, and identify if that is going to be allowable or not, and we'll come back with clarification on that.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Um,
I think the other question for Maureen is on the same topic, and Maureen, we will definitely come back and talk more about that once we get some more clarification. I also see a question from a Lori regarding how the limit was identified for the pre-vocational service. Pre-vocational service, by its nature, is intended to be a time-limited service. Not only is that a limit that is in place in lots of places that utilize that service, that was also a very specific recommendation from Community Now in their recommendations to add that service, was to ensure that that became a time-limited service to help someone move towards employment and not something where it became stuck and just continuing to receive that service long term. We got some feedback at the point that the potential new services were put out Enroll, et cetera, that folks wanted some greater clarity and specificity with regard to that limitation. And so that use of 520 hours over the course of 2 different plan years was added in response to that request. I think that we have covered, I believe, the majority of questions, if not all, at this time. We still have a fair bit of material to get through. And I'm going to ask that we keep going on just to make sure we get through the rest of the material. And so if there are more questions on this particular topic, specifically the nuance of how to coordinate transportation between services and how that gets addressed and covered, definitely if you have additional feedback on that or additional nuance that you want to convey, I'd really recommend that you respond to the survey at the end of this training or reach out via the HCBS waivers email box. Definitely, Karen and I will be sure that this topic comes back and is discussed with more detail by the department to make sure that any nuance or specificity that's needed is detailed and discussed. All right. So once we get through the process of developing someone's budget, as well as identifying the ways that someone can get supports beyond their budget, it then comes time to develop the plan. Plans are going to be developed slightly differently to align with the new budget model, as well as to align with the home and community-based services settings rule. This is because there's going to be more services to choose from, a reduction in the kinds of sublimits that exist, and some additional flexibility to move between budget components. Plan developers are going to be tasked with working with participants to determine exactly what services they want to receive and how those services may look slightly different than how they have received services today. We're going to quickly just walk folks through the new ISP, as we know that oftentimes providers of service are invited and enroll in those planning meetings. And then we'll talk about some specific requirements for providers of service in addition to the ISP itself. So the ISP, just like today, is going to include information, including contact information for the participant as well as their guardian, as well as that information for the plan developer. Then it will go into the participant's strengths, the services that are important to that person, including services that perhaps the participant isn't receiving at this time. So Karen may identify that support and employment is important to her, but doesn't currently have a job. We would still want to indicate on the PCP that that's a service that was important to Karen and that there may be goals related to moving her toward getting ready for that competitive employment so she could begin to use that service in the future. Then a discussion of how the participant identified their personal goals and desired outcomes, the kinds of activities that will assist the individual in achieving those outcomes, where the participant chose to live or receive services, and any alternative settings that were discussed. Then the ISP will go into risk factors. These include any factors that there are for the individual or people around them, and then the specific measures that were in place to mitigate or minimize those kinds of risks. These would be things such as backup plans or other kinds of strategies. If, as a result of identified risks, there was any need to restrict a participant's rights, this box would be checked on the ISP, and then there would be the need to answer the subsequent questions, including a description of exactly what rights were restricted and why, what needs were being addressed because of the restriction, a clear description of the intervention that is being used and how you will ensure that it is causing no harm, a list of less intrusive methods that were utilized previously and were found to be unsuccessful in addressing the need, how data will be collected regularly on the ongoing effectiveness of that restriction, as well as how often the PCP team would review any restrictions that were in place. The next section of the ISP would describe the service coordination service, exactly what kind of supports were being provided, and how the individual or their family members could contact the service coordinator, what to do in an emergency if the service coordinator was not available. The next section would go into the paid services, the DD paid services, specifically meaning those services paid through the adult DD program. We would then go into a section discussing non-DD paid services. These could be services that were provided through someone's medical card. This is also where perhaps you would put something like services are provided around employment through vocational rehabilitation, or services that were provided under the A&D waiver for individuals who are receiving state plan only services from the adult DD program, but are receiving those waiver services from a different program. Would then describe any natural or unpaid supports. And then it would be concluded by having the participant and their guardian sign an informed consent, informed choice, and then having the plan developer sign as well. In addition to the ISP itself, there are a number of services that will require something known as a questionnaire. Questionnaires will be required for pre-vocational services, career planning services, and supported employment services, and they will need to be submitted with the plan, as well as with any addendums if there are changes to the service in question. All questionnaires require some basics. That includes a header, which provides the participant's name, their Medicaid ID number, the plan start and end date, the name of the provider as it is listed in Gainwell, the provider's authorized representative name, that person's signature, and the date in which the questionnaire was being signed. Here is a snapshot of the questionnaire for supported employment. This would include how many hours of community supported employment the person would receive weekly, whether or not the participant is performing competitive work in the integrative work setting, the informal and formal goals, and then the signature. An individual must be receiving that support in competitive work in an integrated setting in order to receive supported employment. So the answer on this questionnaire would need to be yes in order to obtain this service. The next questionnaire we're going to walk through is that for pre-vocational services. We'll start by asking how many hours of individual pre-vocational services the participant will receive weekly, as well as how many hours of group pre-vocational services the participant will receive weekly, asking whether or not the participant has previously accessed any services, and if so, for how long, so the total number of hours that were previously utilized, remembering that it is limited to 520 total hours over the lifetime of the participant. We would include both the informal and formal goals, and again, signatures. The last questionnaire we're going to talk about is career planning. Here too, we would ask how many hours of career planning will the participant receive weekly, the informal and formal goals, and signatures. Any plan that requires a questionnaire, any plan that requires, that is not listed on this list here, requires an implementation plan. What that means is that career planning, pre-vocational services, as well as supported employment do require implementation plans, which need to be completed within 14 days of receipt of the authorized plan of service or the start date of the plan. You do not need to submit implementation plans, but you need to have them completed and on hand. Status reviews need to be completed for all providers who must have an implementation plan. That means that status reviews are applicable for providers of career planning, pre-vocational services, and supported employment. Plans must also report the participant's progress towards goal to the plan monitor. These status reviews are submitted to the service coordinator semi-annually and at the annual service person-centered planning meeting. They need to include the status of the supports and services, maintenance, and or the delay or any prevention of regression. Semi-annual status reviews must be submitted to the plan monitor at least 15 calendar days from the 6-month review, and annual status reviews must be submitted to the plan monitor no later than 30 calendar days from the end of the plan date. Now that we've talked about how you develop the plan and how then the questionnaires are completed, implementation plans are completed, and status reviews are done, individuals would then receive their services. That's the part where you as employment providers would do your work. You would help someone in the ways that were outlined in the implementation plan and in their plan. But what happens if someone needs to make changes during the plan year? Currently, individuals who need to make changes, so move to different services or get a different provider during the year, would do so via a plan addendum. As we move into the new model, there are some circumstances which require someone to receive a whole new plan in the middle of the year. That would be when an individual is going to receive a new level or a new service mix within a given plan year. If that were the case, then an individual would require a mid-year plan. There are 3 circumstances where a mid-year plan may be needed. That would be due to a change in condition, due to a service mix change, or due to a person receiving a new level due to a verification that happened off cycle or not in alignment with the completion of an assessment. I'm going to quickly walk through each of those in a little bit more detail. A participant can request a new assessment if there has been a change in their condition and the most recent assessment is no longer accurate. If that is the case, the plan developer would need to complete a change in condition request detailing what changes occurred and submit any supporting documentation about that change. Liberty would then review the documentation and confirm that the change warranted a new assessment. If it did, Liberty would contact the individual to schedule that new assessment. After the assessment is completed, Liberty would send out a new notice. If the change in condition resulted in a new support level being assigned, the plan developer would need to submit a new plan that was prorated for the rest of the plan year. If the change in condition did not result in a new support level, then a new plan would not need to be developed because the individual's level would not have changed. Here is a snapshot of the change in condition request form. Contact information for the participant and guardian is across the top. Then a request that you describe the condition that has changed. Then a description of how the current assessment does not reflect the individual's needs, as well as a request to list the documentation that is included to substantiate the need for a change in condition. This form is then signed by the participant and the guardian if applicable and submitted to the information coordinator at the department. If a participant has not had a change in their condition, but simply want to move into a different type of living setting or receive a new service mix, they would require a service mix change request. This could be because of a change in where someone lives, so moving from certified family home into supported living, or in the way that they get their services, so moving from traditional to self-direction. Liberty would determine whether or not they received all of the necessary information with the request and identify whether or not the participant had a SIS-A on file. If the SIS-A was already on file, this process could be completed simply by using a file review. If no SIS-A had been completed, the individual would need to complete a full assessment. Liberty would then complete the assessment and mail out a new budget notice so the individual could develop a new plan. This slide shows the service mix change request form. Again, contact information across the top, a question identifying whether or not the person has had a SIS-A, the currently assigned service mix, the requested service mix, signatures. Again, this would be submitted to the information coordinator. Finally, we have off-cycle verification requests. Participants always have the right to request verification. However, if that request comes more than 30 days after the assessment that is conducted by Liberty, they will be asked whether or not this request is due to a change in the participant's needs. If a request for verification is being made because of a change in the participant's needs since their last assessment, then what they should instead do is request a change in condition. If there has not been any change, but simply a desire to go through verification at a later point during the year, then the IAP or Liberty will send a notice requesting supporting documentation and the verification questionnaire, and the verification team will meet and determine whether or not the participant is eligible for levels M or B. If they are determined eligible for levels M or B based on the documents they submit in the verification questionnaire, they will receive a budget notice and will need to prepare a new prorated plan. If they are found not eligible for levels M or B, they will also get a notice with that decision, but they can keep their current service plan as their level will not have changed. The next few slides are just some resources that are available. I'm going to walk through them lickety-split, as this will be provided shortly on the My Choice Matters website, and you can reference it there. And then we will open it up to address questions for the rest of our time together. So, list of applicable IDAPA rules for providers of supported employment, career planning, and pre-vocational services. A list of applicable IDAPA rules for non-medical transportation providers. A series of websites, including the My Choice Matters site, the IDAPA rules, Community Now, and the Provider Handbook. A link to the survey, which we'll also put in the chat momentarily. And just a reminder to keep on the lookout for any additional updates regarding the date for implementation, the release of relevant information, and the release of the Adult DD external manual. With that, I will open it up for questions for the last 10 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Lena. I did check in with our care managers on the question of supported employment providers providing transportation, and kind of starting the clock on supported employment when they pick up an individual. And it appears I was probably wrong on that. I don't think that is a possibility, but we are still going to go back and have some more clarifying conversations with the KW team, and we'll work, as Alina mentioned, to really provide more clarifying information about how the non-medical transportation can be used in combination with the supported living, in combination with supported employment, and kind of what is the availability for both supported living and supported employment providers to provide transportation within their service itself. So look for more clarification on that coming soon. Outside of the non-medical transportation questions, we had a question that asked, does the assessment address vocational needs?
The assessment, the CSA, does have a section that talks about employment-related needs that can be utilized to help with the planning process and to determine what services may make sense for an individual to utilize.
There's also, it looks like there's a couple of questions I'm going to kind of summarize here. Asking about, we mentioned that a status review would be needed for the pre-vocational or the career planning services, I believe. And the question was generally around kind of what would that status report look like, given that it's just such a short, potentially short 1 hour per week kind of service?
So career planning is the service that's limited to 4 hours per week. And so that would be, and yes, someone may use less than that. But the status review is really an opportunity to identify, what is the progress towards the outcome or the goal of that service. So career planning is really intended to be time limited, intended to help build out a plan for how someone is going to seek employment, and identify exactly how they want to move towards that trajectory. So a status review could include information like the progress on developing that plan, things of that nature. I think that when we're thinking about the status review for these kinds of services, it may look different than the status reviews you may be used to in other kinds of services, but the goal is to identify that we are making progress towards the outcome of that service and the goal of that service, which is the development of a plan for how someone will move towards seeking the career trajectory that they hope to receive.
Great, thank you, Alina. I think there's one other question that asks, when and where on the My Choice Matters website will recorded WebEx trainings be located? On the My Choice Matters website, when you get to that main page, there is a separate tab for trainings and information, and you'll be able to go to that tab and look under training information. There are a number of the PowerPoint presentations that have been posted at this time. I'm not seeing the recordings just yet,
Yep.
though.
As of yesterday, they were having some delays just because of the size of those recordings, getting them up on the website. So that is something that is still very much being worked on. And the goal was to get those recordings up from previously provided trainings this week, if at all possible. So that is the correct location to go to. Again, the My Choice Matters website, under the Information and Training tab, the very last tab on those lists there, and then training information. And they'll be there just as soon as they're able to get up.
Thank you, Alina. We had one question regarding the limitation on pre-vocational, asking if the 520 hours was only for pre-vocational and not supported employment.
Yes, that is correct. The 520 hours over up to 2 different plan years is only a limitation for the pre-vocational service, not for supported employment.
There's a follow-up information or a question regarding the status reviews and kind of the plans. How can there be a plan for a career when a person does not have the information needed to make an informed choice? For example, where they will learn about how wages impact benefits. And Lori, we may need to unmute you to kind of help clarify that question, but I think what you're asking, and if I don't clarify this correctly, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you here. But I think what you're asking is what kind of things would go into an implementation plan for career planning? I don't think it's that there has to be, it's how someone goes about figuring out what type of career they may like to pursue. And Alina, you may be able to offer a little more insight on that.
Yeah, and I think perhaps, Lori, maybe you're also getting to the question around how the potential that high wage earning jobs could have an impact on someone's eligibility for other kinds of benefits, such as Medicaid. And I think within the confines of the career planning service, a piece of that could be connecting somebody with benefits counseling and helping somebody connect with a better understanding of what sorts of pieces need to be in place to ensure that their needs can be met and they are also able to, meet their goals with related to employment.
Um, see, I see Lori added another comment. Tammy, would you be able to unmute Lori so we can just get clarification to make sure we're responding to her question?
Yep, she's unmuted.
Hey Karen, it's Lori.
Hi.
I'm really struggling with the idea that when I'm in a person-centered plan and we talk about employment services, that the participant would be at a place where they could even start to outline a career plan. Because how can I write objectives towards some type of a career or move to employment when they may not have had any exposure whatsoever to employment? I'm just kind of struggling with that idea.
So I think I understand what you're getting at, Lori, and I think the goal of the career planning service is to really help somebody begin down that path and think about what it is they would like to do in the future. So a
Right,
goal
I could-
a goal related to that is not specific to, this is the career I want to engage in, but I want to start thinking through and developing, an idea about what career I'm interested in. A good service to do that is career planning. And then the goal related to that is, thinking through and exploring what career I would like to, where my interests lie, what I would like to pursue. You know, again, with that idea of getting somebody prepared to perhaps move to vocational rehabilitation, or for somebody who maybe is already employed but is not particularly happy in their job, thinking about how they could start seeking how to make a move to a different kind of employment that was more aligned with their skills and interests.
Well, and Alina, I understand that when we talk about career planning, that for me kind of makes sense. But when you're talking about pre-vocational and your comment about a status review would need to address their progress towards a career plan, I don't get that. I don't get how you can have a career plan when you're involved with pre-vocational services. So,
I think that there's maybe either a typo or a miscommunication, because that is not a requirement of pre-vocational. It would be their progress towards the stated goal of that service. So if Karen is seeking pre-vocational supports to help her, work on engaging with coworkers appropriately, then the status would be around making progress on that goal, which is the goal around pre-vocational services, not around building a career plan. I apologize for that confusion.
okay, thank you.
Let's see, will there be examples of what pre-vocational goals could look like? And I think our response there is going to be, yes, the department is working to put together kind of examples of what those implementation plans and what potential goals could look like for each one of these new services to help provide a little more guidance. So those will be forthcoming. Another question about whether or not the slide deck will be available. And again, that'll be available on our My Choice Matters website under the Training and Information tab. Let's see here. And then, let's see. One individual said a list of expected transports for ResHab providers in the new service array may help answer how transportation to employment will be covered. Thank you, Kelly, for that comment, and we will definitely take that back as we kind of look back through the questions and comments that were raised regarding transportation for employment services. And another individual asked, oh, did I miss a question in here? Didn't I? One second. Oh, how will the department ensure that volunteer positions align with Department of Labor rules? And Maureen, we may need to take you off mute to kind of let you kind of clarify your question as well. Supported employment services have to be competitive, paid, integrated employment. So for supported employment services, that volunteer position really isn't something that we would reimburse under that supported employment service. And I'm not sure if that's going to answer your question or if you'd like to clarify. If you want to kind of clarify your question, Maureen, we're happy to take you off mute if you raise your hand, or Tammy, if you can just take Maureen off mute for us.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Karen. No, I'm very clear on what supported employment is. But under some of the other services with career planning and pre-vocational services, specifically on some of these calls, you talked about having individuals participate in volunteering or volunteer sites in the community. And the Department of Labor has some very specific rules and guidelines regarding what they consider to be volunteering. And so I am I want to know what the department's plan is to ensure that these sites that are being utilized are compliant with the Department of Labor rules and regulations. Ultimately, the employer will be at risk. But you can have an employer that thinks they're doing some, helping someone out by having them volunteer, washing coffee cups or learning how to make a pizza, when in actually they're violating Department of Labor rules and regulations, and they can get nailed. And, as a company that does a lot of community employment, we work with a lot of different employers. It's important to us that they see us as knowledgeable and about those rules and regulations and people that would never put them at risk. So I want to know what the department is going to do to put those guidelines, so to speak, in place to ensure that those sites meet those rules.
Thank you for that clarification, Maureen. I think that really helped me understand the concern. With regard to volunteering within the scope of, say, a pre-vocational service, and then the identification of, perhaps a site by which where someone would do some volunteering as a part of that service, that really would be related to, the specific service provider and the site kind of all being knowledgeable about the rules around what volunteering is or isn't allowable per the Department of Labor rules. I think, the department can probably, provide some additional guidance or outline, really identifying that it's important that folks make sure that they are in alignment with those rules if a plan is going to include volunteering, just to sort of help make sure everyone is maintaining and meeting those obligations. But it really is, the obligation of the provider, both the provider of the service and then the site with where someone would be doing a little volunteering, to ensure that they are not violating those Department of Labor rules. I don't know that the department would be in a position to go in and do kind of a case-by-case check-in on that in that way. But an understanding and making sure everyone has a shared understanding about what those rules are before they include any volunteering within the scope of a plan related to pre-vocational, I think is important and is something that we'll want to make sure is well communicated.
Thank you.
So I think we are at our 4 o'clock time. We've got a couple more questions that have come in that I think we can take back to the team and pull responses back in a later presentation. Elena, is there anything you see that we can kind of get to quickly here, or?
Yeah, I think that those are the ones that we can definitely, handle pretty quickly. I want to thank everyone for their time today. I also want to just again encourage folks, if you have additional feedback or feel like there's additional training that would be helpful, specifically, do please complete that survey. I just put the link back, so it's at the very bottom of the chat for folks. It's a very quick survey. We really want to ensure that the department is getting folks the information that they need in preparation for the new model and the new services. And if there's areas where we don't have good information yet or don't have good guidance or some more specifics need to be outlined, we want to be in a position to help you get the information you need to help roll out with the new services and the new model. So please do give us that feedback. Also, always feel free to contact the department via the HCBS waivers email inbox with any questions or concerns. As you can tell, the department's it's hard at work at getting everything lined up for the implementation of these new models and services. So any areas where you need more specific guidance or feel like more training is warranted, we want that feedback to make sure that we can do our best to meet those needs.
Great. Well, with that, I will thank everyone again, and we will close this presentation. Thank you.